I read an article the other day about a man by the name of Greg Garfield, who was patient zero, or the first COVID patient to be admitted at the Province St. Joseph Medical Center in Burbank, California, back in February. He spent well over 2 months at this hospital, and he spent 31 days of those months in a medically induced coma. One of the details that really jumped out at me in this story was that the doctors told Mr. Garfield that he had only a 1% chance of survival. 1% chance to survive. Nevertheless, on Friday, May 8th, after spending over 2 months in the hospital, over a month in a medically induced coma, Mr. Garfield overcame the odds and walked out of that hospital to great applause, a healed man. Have you ever been in a 1% sort of situation? Maybe in your marriage or your job or your financial situation, maybe dealing with parenting a certain child, young or old. Maybe there's a sin you've been dealing with for a long time in your life and you just know that you're never going to be able to get rid of it. Whatever the situation is, you simply are convinced that it's an impossible one. You look at all the evidence, you listen to all the advice from your well-meaning loved ones and friends, you look at other people's stories that were in the same situation and how they ended, and you just know that you have no chance. Not even 1%. If you believe the odds are against you, I have a question for you today. How do you determine your odds? In 1 Kings chapter 18, a pagan king is leading Israel. Ahab is his name. He is a worshiper of Baal. During this time, Elijah is God's prophet, tasked with trying to call the Israelite people back to God. And so Elijah presents a challenge to Ahab and his 450 prophets of Baal. He meets these prophets and Ahab on Mount Carmel, with all of Israel watching. And both Elijah and the prophets of Baal are given an altar with a bull. And their task is to call on their respective deities to light this altar on fire, to burn this bull and this altar, to send down fire from above. And whichever God replies is the one true God. Well, Elijah lets the Baal prophets go first, and boy, do they try. They get an E for effort. They wail and cry out to Baal all morning. And the Bible says that around noon, Elijah started making fun of them. 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 27. Cry aloud, Elijah says, for he is a god. Either he is musing, listen, or relieving himself, or he's on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep and must be awakened, end quote. He's just chiding them on. At this, they start cutting themselves with swords and lances, which is part of their custom, part of their worship practice, I guess. And they're wailing and wailing for the rest of the day. Nothing ever happens. Baal does nothing. Finally, at the end of the day, Elijah has the bull put on his altar, and then he does something extra. He has 12 jars full of water poured over it so that the wood is soaked and the water has pooled around it into a trench. Now, what are the odds that when Elijah prays, God will send down fire and light this altar that is soaking wet? Well, your answer depends on which you believe in more, on which one you believe in more, God or this world. If you believe in this world, then it is utterly hopeless. There's no way that suddenly that altar is going to burst into flames. But if you believe in God, well, anything's possible, right? Elijah prays and asks God to light this altar so that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. This is always God's goal, that people would know he's the one true God. And sure enough, the fire comes down, and the Bible says it consumed the burnt offerings and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. Are you feeling hopeless about something today? Are you convinced that you have less than a 1% chance in your marriage against a sin, dealing with your kids, paying the bills, finding a good job? Well, how are you determining your odds? In 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21, Elijah cries out to the Israelites who have put their faith in Baal, and he says this, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. Might I suggest to you that if you're feeling hopeless about something that you know God can help you in, then you are very likely limping between two different opinions about who God is. If God is God, if he is love, and if Jesus Christ rose from the grave, then what are you dealing with that he cannot deliver you through? God has a habit of waiting for the odds to be overwhelmingly against him before he moves. He allowed 12 jars of water to be poured over this altar before he lit it. He dwindled Gideon's army down to 300 with no swords before he sent them out against an army of hundreds of thousands. And we mustn't ever forget that Jesus was dead for 3 days before he rose again. Why does God do this? So that we will put our hope in him, no matter how dark it seems, no matter what the odds are in this world. We'll see you tomorrow.